Hi, welcome to another edition of The Real Moment of Science. I'm Cameron Sahami.
And I'm Kachin Yu.
And today we have a very special guest with us. We have Dr. Deane Bowers, Professor of Entomology at CU. And if you could introduce Dr. Bowers to us.
Well, Dr. Bowers got her PhD at the University of Massachusetts in 1979. And she's been with the university since 1989. And she's an associate professor of biology and also the curator of entomology at the University Museum. So if you ever go to the museum and check out all the insects, you know who's responsible for all that.
And please do come by.
Yeah. And her research interests are actually the study of Lepidoptera, which are butterflies, and also the defensive mechanisms which the caterpillars use to protect themselves against prey or predators. But today, she'll be here to talk with us about beneficial insects, which is a little bit off her research interests. And
I think it's related to a class you teach, right, on
Right.
insects and people, right?
Well, I teach an entomology class, and I give a couple of lectures on insects and humans. And it's sort of my avocation in entomology, if you will.
yeah, I think when people think about insects, they tend to see a fear of insects, especially things like mosquitoes or cockroaches or just
They're
bugs in general.
disgusted, repulsed, they step on them, swat them.
Mm-hmm. But you're here today to change our minds.
I sincerely hope so.
Okay, well, can you, where should we start?
What I'd like to do is show you a few slides and talk a little bit about three different aspects of beneficial insects. And I'm not going to be spending any time talking about insects that are used for biological control, that is, insects that may feed on introduced weeds or actually feed on insects that are crops of pests of crops. But what I'd like to do is talk about three things. First of all, insect products that insects produce that we use. And especially I'll spend some time talking about honeybees, which is one of the commoner ones, but then I'll spend some time talking about some that people may know a little bit less about. And then I'd like to spend just some brief time talking a little bit about forensic entomology, an area of crime investigation that people may not know too much about. Insects are actually very important in that. And then I'm going to finish up by talking a little bit about insects in the human diet.
Okay.
Great. Well, should we get started with that slideshow?
Yeah, maybe I could have
John,
a
if
few
you could have
slides.
the lights
Thanks.
off, please. And I think the first slide's already up.
Okay, I think people are probably pretty familiar with some of the products that honeybees produce. We get honey, of course, but also wax is produced by bees from specialized glands in their mouth. However, and the next slide, please. The most important use of insects is actually for pollination. Honeybees are particularly important. Honeybees were actually introduced into North America by the early settlers, and they now are used to pollinate a variety of different crops, many orchard crops, such as peaches, cherries, pears, apples, and the like. And in fact, if you compare the production of, say, honey and wax in terms of dollars, it's about $140 million a year. But the value of honeybees as pollinators is in the billions of dollars. They pollinate these crops, and they also pollinate alfalfa, which is used as an important forage for insects.
And this is just in the United States alone?
Just in the United States alone, right. Honeybees are actually native to Europe. Next slide, please. And in fact, there are many apiculturists who specialize in renting out large numbers of bee colonies, which they move around from one orchard to another in order to pollinate the flowers as they're blooming. Next slide, please. Now, another product of insects is silk. And silk is produced by the larvae, shown here, of the true silk moth, Bombyx mori. And these caterpillars are specialists on mulberry. And you can see the larvae here feeding on mulberry leaves. And they're about 3 inches long when they're full grown. Next slide. And rearing these caterpillars can be quite something. Until the advent of an artificial diet, they had to be fed on these leaves. And so this is a huge tray that's full of mulberry leaves and covered with caterpillars. And these leaves had to be harvested by hand, and still in many places in Asia and India where the silk is produced, this is the way in which the larvae are grown. Next slide. But it's actually what the caterpillar does as it's getting ready to pupate that's important. Many insects, especially the Lepidoptera, butterflies and moths, produce silk at various stages of their lives. And here, this caterpillar is spinning a silken cocoon which acts as a protection around the caterpillar as it pupates, as it goes through the process of metamorphosis. And here you can see this caterpillar is spinning more and more silk. Next slide, please. And here you can see individual pupae of these silk moths in each one of these little boxes. Now, the silk of the true silk moth is particularly valuable for several reasons. One is you can see here it's very white, and as a result of that, it takes dye extremely well. So the colors can be really vibrant. But also, the caterpillar spins this silk in a single strand. So this strand can be unwound and continuous, and there are several miles of silk in a single cocoon.
Wow.
Next slide. And here's the caterpillar just before it's pupating. And next slide. One more.
Next slide, please.
And here's the pupa inside. What happens then is that this cocoon with the pupa inside is removed and boiled to kill the pupa and also loosen the secretion that's actually holding the silk together. Next slide. And in traditional culture, and still in many areas in parts of Asia and India, this is done by hand. These are pupae that are boiling, and here you can see the strands of silk that are being unwound. Next slide. Next slide, please.
Next slide.
And here's a marketplace showing some examples of cocoons for sale. Next slide. Actually, although the true silk moth is the most valuable source of silk, there are many other species of moths that produce silk as well. This is another species of silk moth. This, as you can see, the silk shown in the cocoon down to your right is not as white, but it is also used commonly for silk production. Next slide. Now, another product of insects that is less well known these days is shellac. And shellac is the product of an insect called a scale insect, which may have infested some of your house plants. And these insects produce a protective coating over them, which is called shellac, which can be extracted with appropriate solvents, and we then use it to make a protective coating over things that we make. Most shellac these days is actually synthetic, but you can go to the hardware store and buy certain types of shellac that may say all natural on them that are actually made from the lac insect, as it's called.
Are there any benefits to using all natural shellac versus artificial shellac?
No, and in fact, probably the artificial shellacs will last longer. Next slide. Now, another product of insects that again has been very popular in the past but is much less known now is a dye called cochineal. And this is also made by or found in an insect that may be familiar to some of you as a houseplant pest. These are relatives of mealybugs. And these insects feed on Opuntia cactus. And these were the primary source of red dyes for many, many years. And if I could just have the lights up, I can show you a couple of examples of that. The insects themselves are these little tiny guys, silvery dark things that you can see here.
Oh,
Can
wow,
you see
that's
those
the
guys?
actual
This
bug
is the
itself?
actual dried insect. They're harvested and dried in the sun.
Get a shot at that?
And then I'll show you what the color, when you grind them up, you get this, hold your hand out here.
Okay.
You get this red substance, and if you smear it around a little bit, you can see that it's a really, really bright red. In fact, until the advent of synthetic dyes in the mid-1800s, this was the primary source of red coloration. So the British redcoats, the red jackets that they wore dyed with cochineal. The first American flag, the red stripes, were dyed with cochineal.
It's sort of like dried blood.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's a compound called carminic acid that's found in the blood of
really?
these insects, which is what causes this dye. But one of the really neat things about it is that by changing the pH or adding metal ions to this, you can manufacture a variety of different colors. So this is cochineal by itself, this pale lilac-y color. But you can get a bright pink if you add tin. Lime juice makes this beautiful rust, and this is still used a lot in South America. And so you can get from purple to rose to rust colors, all from this single insect.
Wow. I understand you dyed these yourself, is that
I did, actually,
another
yes.
avocation?
Yes, part of my avocation, yes it is, exactly.
Wow, that's great.
So cochineal is still used actually for people who are interested in natural dyeing. It's also still used in some cosmetics. Before the acceptance of red dye number 4 by the Food and Drug Administration, it was used to make the red in maraschino cherries. I thought that was particularly fun. Okay, next slide.
Some bugs in that Roman
Now, I'd like to change the subject here a little bit and talk briefly about forensic entomology. This slide summarizes what most people think about insects: horror. But insects are actually extremely important in certain criminal investigations, especially one type of insect, the flies. Flies, in particular blowflies, are attracted to carrion. Females go in, lay their egg on a recently dead corpse, and the larvae develop in that corpse at a particular rate, depending on the temperature. Particular species may colonize a corpse at different times after it's been dead. And so forensic entomologists can use what species of flies are there, what developmental stage the flies are at, how many flies there are, to actually figure out when somebody died, and in some cases where it died, depending on what species are available.
Wow.
And there's a lot of case studies where forensic entomologists have been really important in figuring out who did what when.
Okay.
Now, this also serves as an introduction to the final topic that I'd like to cover, and that's insects in the human diet. Now, most people don't think about doing these sorts of things with insects, but in fact, insects are an important dietary item for many cultures. And although most Americans and most Westerners, in fact, view eating insects with repulsion and disgust, there are many cultures that consider insects a delicacy. There are a variety of recipes that use insects. And I'd just like to illustrate a couple of examples of that sort of thing. If I could have the next slide, please.
Actually, no. Were all those insects that you showed there eaten by one person or another?
No, in fact, there are very special types of insects that are eaten. This is one that's fairly commonly found in Asian markets. This is a giant water bug. It's about 2.5 to 3 inches long. It's considered a delicacy. Next slide. And this is a close-up of more of these that give you a little bit more of a sense of the size of these guys. They are huge. Next slide.
So how do you eat that? You just start munching on it?
You just start munching on it. They're usually roasted.
Okay.
Wow.
These caterpillars are collected in South Africa, and you can see that they're also quite large. They're dried or canned, and they're commonly used. You can buy them in the markets there quite easily. Next slide. They're called mopani worms, and these are large bags of them that are dried. You can get them in tomato sauce in a variety of different ways, and these are used a lot by a variety of people in South Africa. Next slide. These are palm grubs, and many times when insects are used as human food, there are a couple of aspects about the insects that make them valuable. One is a high fat content. So insects that are favored as human food tend to have a high fat content, such as these palm grubs. These are about a couple of inches long. They turn into a weevil, so a very large beetle. So you don't want to eat the adult beetles because they have a very tough carapace and not much fat in there that people can feed on. Very often these are roasted or dried before they're actually eaten. They're rarely the grubs are rarely eaten raw. Certain other types of insects, however, are eaten raw. For example, ants are a very common insect that's used for food. Termites, insects that can be found in relatively large numbers. In fact, a large number of cultures all over the world use insects as food, and even here in North America it's starting to catch on. There was a restaurant in Washington, D.C. that featured insect dishes. There are various societies like the Entomological Society that feature banquets that serve insects as food. And for your delectation and enjoyment, Cameron and Kachun, I brought a few insects that you might like to try this evening.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think we'll be doing
So
that. in just a
if we could
few
have the lights up here, maybe we can have a little bit of a
Well, maybe we should
A
sit back
sample.
down for this.
Yeah, probably you'd like to do that. Oh, and I also wanted to point out that eating insects has been something that was popular much earlier in Western culture than now. This is a little book called Why Not Eat Insects that was written in the mid-1800s. And there's a quote in the beginning, "Them insects eat up every blessed green thing that do grow, and us farmers starves. Well, eat them and grow fat." So first of all, I brought some of my mealworm chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, okay.
And
wow.
to make these, you take your
You can see the little guys right in there. I don't know if you can get a close-up of that.
Yeah.
Henry, can you get a shot? See that little guy saying hi right there?
So
there's
I always put one on top for decoration.
Oh, look at that one.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to make these, you take your favorite chocolate chip cookie recipe and add a half a cup of chopped up mealworms to that.
Now, where would you buy mealworms?
You can buy them at your local pet stores, but what I recommend if you're going to do this is that you buy them a few days before you're actually going to use them, take them home and feed them on oatmeal and potatoes so they sort of get cleaned out. You don't know what they've been eating in the cultures in the pet store. And that way you can be sure that they're clean and everything. So, and they're really good, extra protein.
I'm going to take a bite right now.
And mealworms have a very nutty, sort of crunchy taste.
Moist.
Yeah, it's real
So-
chewy.
Not so.
So
Quite
not so
good.
bad. And there's a lot of mealworms in here. You probably can't even tell the difference between these guys. I have some for all of you later on too.
Yeah, there's mealworm
crew
cookies for the
definitely
crew, guys.
needs
So,
some.
Yep, I can see the crew salivating right now, too.
Now, Kachun had mentioned that he wanted a really big fat insect to eat.
Am I going to try and eat that one?
So I
No,
brought
that-
him one that was really
that,
big and
that
fat.
one looks like it's more pet size. Like a.
Yes,
Can you
that's,
actually eat that? I mean,
No.
is that too shelly?
no, I brought this.
Oh, okay. Just to scare me.
This is a cockroach, which actually, a Madagascar hissing cockroach, they don't
Wow.
have wings, so they don't fly. And they do make very nice pets. They live for a couple of years, sometimes as much as 3 years. And when they're upset, I don't know
Yes.
if these guys are going to do it. They
Oh,
hiss.
there we go.
So, anyway.
But we're not going to eat that.
But you're
No,
not going to
no,
eat
Okay.
these.
That's more like a pet.
I
That's
was
like
just
a
going to
dog.
make you really nervous. So I
Yeah,
did.
because I did promise Dr. Bowers that I would eat something live.
So I brought you a mealworm,
Okay.
a live mealworm.
Okay.
I didn't want to bring you a whole bunch. I thought that might be a little much, and I thought the cookies needed them.
Okay, so we can get a shot of this. So this is what a mealworm looks like.
That
when
is a
it's-
mealworm. It will turn into a beetle. As an adult, it's a beetle.
You better eat it now.
Okay, should I eat it now?
Yes,
Toss
you
it
should
back.
eat it now.
Now, should I chew it or should I just swallow?
Whatever you like.
Okay. Well, I think
And I can tell you about the minimum crude protein in mealworms is 43%, crude fat 45%, and I have a couple of recipes here if you want to try cooking.
Well,
them.
I think we actually have a graphic about
that's
yeah.
that's right.
Is that a
that's one
recipe
other
or is that
thing.
the graph or is that the amount of food?
It's a graphic for the amount of allowable insect parts.
Okay, well.
So if we can
people-
have that up.
So you just saw somebody eat a mealworm, and so most of us think that eating insects is totally disgusting. However, all of us in our diets probably eat between 1 and 2 pounds of insects a year, and that's because
Oh, really?
there is. It would be really toxic to use enough insecticides on crops to have no insects on any of the food that we eat. And so the USDA has established a set of requirements for the maximum amount of insect parts that can occur in various kinds of food. So if you eat peanut butter, for example, there can be fairly large amounts of insect or pieces of insects in that apple butter, ketchup, those are ones that are particularly notorious, but also many fresh fruits and vegetables.
Wow.
Because it's just impossible to have insecticides as high as they would have to be to prevent insects from being found on them. And I personally wouldn't want to eat that food myself. So,
well, if that graphic is up, we can go ahead and display that. I'd also like to remind the audience at home that this is a live show, so if you have any questions for Dr. Bowers, please feel free to call in. The phone number is 440-3572, and there'll be a graphic. That'll show that phone number. We welcome you to call in and ask Dr. Bowers some questions. So, 1 to 2 pounds of insects a year is allowable in the U.S. diet.
well, that's if you take a typical American diet and what we eat. In the food that we eat, we're ingesting between 1 and 2 pounds of insects or insect parts.
What kind of insect parts? These are like roaches in a factory or something?
Well, no, it tends to be not things in the factory, but things that come in on the food from the field.
Okay.
So little Drosophila, small flies, the eggs of Drosophila, or larvae of Drosophila, caterpillars. Usually pieces of caterpillars, I have to say. Pieces of beetles or flies or small, and usually they pull out the larger insects, but the small ones just you can't get rid of. And so this is stuff that comes in, insects that come in with the crops when they come in from the field, and although they try and inspect them and they spray them unless they're organic, there's still insects that are on them.
Wow. Well, this is not only true of the United States, but other countries as well, especially in some of the poorer third world nations where, a large part of the protein that people get is actually consisting of insect parts.
Oh, that's definitely true, yes. So especially in small tribal cultures in South and Central America, hunting insects, because the vertebrate game has been totally depleted, hunting insects is an extremely important part of the diet.
So that's more like, the hunting and gathering aspect of.
Right.
I imagine insects were probably a big part of the diet. If you go back in history.
Well,
So how was it?
Well, I chewed it, but because I guess I only ate one worm, I could hardly really taste anything. I wish he had brought more. But it's all right. Hopefully I won't get sick, but.
Oh, I'm sure you'll be fine.
I've never gotten sick. So you've never eaten any other insects?
Not that I know of.
Not to the best of our knowledge. But I guess
Yes.
one
Well,
to 2
you've
pounds a day, maybe more.
Well, you also had a list of recipes too.
Oh, I did bring some recipes. I told you about how to make the mealworm chocolate chip cookies, but I also have a recipe for crispy Cajun crickets. Basically you roast them and make a butter sauce by adding salt, garlic, paprika, chili powder, Tabasco. And I've actually had some very good crickets and garlic butter served over pasta. That's quite delicious. And then a mealworm trail mix. And as I said, when you roast mealworms, they have so much fat in them that they really puff up and have this crispy, quite delicious taste, I think.
And you just mix it in with regular trail mix?
So you roast them, and then this particular recipe includes different kinds, a cup of pecans, a cup of cashews, and a cup of mealworms. And so you roast them all together with some spices, cumin, chili powder, curry powder, a little cayenne if you're into that. And it's quite good.
Wow, so they're crunchy on the outside and chewy on the inside.
Yep.
Wow.
How long do you roast them? You just
About
put them on a
15
pan?
minutes.
Okay.
So also, I brought, if people are really interested, and maybe you'll be interested in this, Kachun, this is the Food Insects newsletter to which you can subscribe. Okay. And this specializes in talking about insects as food. There's also a couple of websites about this where you can get additional recipes, correspond with other people who are interested in exploring this whole aspect of insects. And so you just have to, I think you look under insects as food,
Okay.
And I found a whole bunch of websites that
Well,
way.
I'm sure we'll have links to all those sites.
Yeah,
on there.
as our regular viewers know, there'll be a web page especially for this show, and we'll feature all these websites and other a link to Dr. Bowers' website and other websites around the net that you can check out. Food as Insects or entomology in general. There's a really nice website at the Smithsonian on insects, which is really
Yes, there's a
interesting.
lot of really good insect websites. And some of them feature insects as food and some of them don't.
So if there are any calls, please let us know
I'm
in
gonna
here.
finish
Getting a
my,
little
I'm gonna
carried
finish
away
my
talking,
cookie
but
myself.
That was a tasty cookie.
Yeah, that was. I have to make sure I finish this.
So do you think that now you would think more seriously about eating insects as an important part of your diet, knowing that you were eating them?
I don't think
I don't think I have much of a choice now. that we,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think
know the
I
facts,
ever
you know.
minded, but part of the problem is, I mean, if you desire to, I mean, actively eat
Would you
insects.
would you order a dish that had insects in it?
I think I would, just for the novelty aspects of it. How expensive is it for
Yeah, that's a
someone
good question.
in the U.S. to start, if someone decided to eat insects as a large part of their diet? I mean, how much would something like that cost?
Actually, you can raise a lot of them yourself.
Really?
Mealworms, for example, are very easy to culture. And you can collect ants. You can, if you get really serious, you can collect wasp larvae. You can raise crickets. Those are the ones that are used more commonly. If you get really serious, you can go hunt giant water bugs. They're nasty though. Oops. So, but a lot of native peoples have very special areas where they know there's abundant insects. So those palm grubs that I showed you a slide of, people will stake out a tree once they know that it's infested, and these grubs take a while to reach maturity. And so they guard this tree, and when they know the larvae or think the larvae are about the right stage, then they chop the tree down and harvest them.
Wow.
So they know places and they know the life cycle of the insects well enough that they can collect them when they need them.
Yeah.
Well, we've got about another minute or so left in the program. I want to thank Dr. Bowers for coming on our show and enlightening us about
bringing such
insects.
tasty treats.
Yeah, these are great. There'll be there's cookies for the crew afterwards,
Yeah.
and
And I'll make sure that each and every one of the crew eats one.
Well, you know, I've made these for my department before, and not everyone will eat them.
Oh, really? Even the biologists
Even the biologists.
get scared of these.
Even after I eat them first. So you guys were great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we do anything for our show. So.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, thanks so much for being on
thank you
our
again.
program. And if anyone is interested in learning more about this, please check out the webpage, the Moment of Science webpage. The address will be in the end credits, and there'll be links to Dr. Bowers' page and links to insect sites on the web.
All right. So
Great.
thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.